Nes, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
I'm feeling a bit giddy at the thought of our conversation. So I've been sat here, like I was saying, for half an hour waiting, and I'm going, come on,
Oh.
it's 7:30 already. Just we had a chat a couple of days ago about what we were going to have a chat about, and I wish we'd recorded that chat, to be honest, because it went on for almost 2 hours, and that was quite.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could start with Uh, well, actually, before I ask you a question, just to let you know the format. So, I have some questions I want to ask Ness, and we've had a conversation about the kinds of things. But generally, we want one of the things we want to do is to put trauma in a sort of social justice context by the end of our conversation. That's really important to both of us and
Yeah.
to not individualize and pathologize. So those are the themes that are going to run through our conversation, and there'll be time for question and answer at the end. So feel free to put your questions as you think of them in the chat, and I'll have a look at the end. But just to start, because obviously I know you and value your work, I just wondered if you could give us a quick overview about why you're so passionate about trauma in relation to your work. How is it coming into your, because I'm like a bit obsessed with awareness raising in a sense, and that comes from my own experience of having nobody around to explain to me why I felt the way I felt, um, and suffering really as a result. So I can't like it's my endeavor to raise awareness really that how you're feeling is not your fault.
Yeah.
Normal. So I just wondered what gets you so what's your thing that makes you kind of go, I need to tell people this?
Well, I guess a bit like you, Elham, like the personal experience. And I think a lot of people in helping professions are kind of wounded healers, or have experienced something of that for themselves. And it's the same for me. And I don't know, I've had quite a lot of jobs in my life. So I have been like one of my first jobs was at an activity centre, where I worked like in adventure with kids. And actually, I went there expecting it to be like kind of fun and pretty chilled. And actually, a lot of the children that were coming were pretty traumatized and had all sorts of things going on. And as a 20 in my early 20s, ended up spending a lot of time with those kids, kind of keeping them calm enough to be able to just kind of be present and be there. And that inspired me, as well as kind of some activism that I was part of, like community activism and with regards to the ecological crisis. Then did a qualification in youth and community work, and um, worked in youth centres, and again with lots of young people and staff who'd experienced trauma, and had all kinds of trauma responses that they weren't really understanding and other people weren't really understanding. It was like, oh, they act like this, and they're so difficult, or I'm a mess, or all of this kind of thing. And like you say, this kind of lack of understanding, really, I think that comes from, and understanding what's going on, and kind of everybody around them not really understanding what's going on. And then I set up a bike project. I'm a bicycle mechanic, and taught people how to fix bikes. And while I was helping people fix wheels and stuff like that, um, working with lots of people who've experienced all kinds of things, and all of that came up. And I mean, one of the great things about that was all of the mindfulness and awareness and focus that's required when you're fixing a bike. So it was quite a grounding thing to be doing. So I guess and then I've been a primary school teacher, and now I'm a psychotherapist. I've been a forest school leader and yoga therapist. And in all of those, and I've been more things as well, but in all of those things, what's shown up is that the same thing that you describe, really, is people having an experience where they that of overwhelm in whatever way, and not really understanding that and not feeling like it's okay.
Mm.
And people around them kind of not really knowing how to respond or how to support or how to be with that.
Mm. So
Yeah,
through all the work that you've done, you've now come to a place where you're offering one-to-ones and hopefully maybe running some groups with the Tara Centre we talked about. We'll talk about that a bit later. Um, and if we started with, I just want to say also, using the word trauma, it can actually be quite activating sometimes. So if you find yourself at any point, please take care of yourself during this conversation. If you feel activated, if you feel like you need to stand up or stretch or drink water or walk away from the computer, or if at any point, please do that. Look after yourself. And we're going to maybe a couple of things throughout just to settle us as well, are we? Yeah,
sounds good. Yeah.
you'll find that as well, hopefully. But please look after yourself. The word trauma is very loaded, and we all interpret it differently. So I'm also mindful of that.
Yeah.
But
And I think that's a really important point about, we all interpret the word, where this word comes from. Um, yeah. Just because you were talking about social justice and that sort of stuff, and the word itself comes from kind of industrialization, and so I guess there's just and how it's defined, how it's defined by the DSM, which is the kind of more official diagnostic tool that clinicians use compared to how people say on Facebook might be defining it, or how we as individuals might define trauma.
yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to start in the sense of when you have somebody in front of you who's asking you this, just somebody like me who's not a therapist, for example, and you wanted to explain their experience to them, how would you address the word trauma? How would you explain to them that what they've experienced is has been a traumatic experience, and the DSM, which is for the clinicians, is far removed from how we as individuals might experience it. So could we start with that? So what would your definition be, your personal definition of?
I think it's something that is, I guess, one of the things that I kind of want to say at the beginning is that, there are no real solid truths. In any medicine, in any science, there's no definitive answer, there's no absolutes. There's some good guesses, there's some good hypotheticals, there's some research where things are really well researched. And in that way, I think that's what I meant about the word. There's a fluidity to that word with regards to generally within a kind of scientific context or a medical context or a medical framework, and also how we individually identify it with it. And I think that might be something, if I was speaking to you as an individual, I think rather than me telling you what I think I would first ask what you think that is. And there's something as well for me about diagnosis and naming that sometimes can be really useful, in that sometimes people feel like, oh, I have this name, and that's a useful tool. But sometimes maybe possibly more influential or more important might be, what is it that's going on for you? Because what if we use this kind of term trauma, or we use the term PTSD, what that looks like for different people is so varied. It's really varied. So there's something about, what does it look like, what does it feel like for you, how does that, what's it like in your relationships with the world, and then yeah, I mean, I feel like I've not really answered. I feel like I've flowerly answered your question, but
Well,
not really given you a definitive.
yeah.
So,
But
but
the reason it's important to put some kind of definition is so people can recognize themselves and go, oh yeah, that's what I've experienced. But one of the reasons why it's good to kind of have some definitions, even though, there are many, many definitions, is when you generally say the word trauma, a lot of people might think, so for example, I come from a country where there was a war and a revolution. So some people might think, oh, well, I haven't been through a war and a revolution, or I haven't, my house hasn't burnt down, or I haven't been in a car accident, therefore that doesn't apply to me. And
Mm,
my passion is to kind of try and support people to understand that it's not the big T traumas.
mm,
Trauma can come from many, many different roots, and it can be different for different people in the same family.
yeah,
I don't know
absolutely.
about other people, but you may have a sibling who's been brought up in the same household, and uh, basically one sibling says nothing happened, and the other sibling is crushed by what happened.
Yeah.
I'm seeing some nods in the in the group.
And we all have different parents, right? Even within the same family.
Family. So it could come from before you were born. It could be in utero. It
Yeah,
could be what was passed down from your grandmother. It could be what passed down through the generations. It
yeah,
could be ancestral. It could be what was going on in the relationship between your mum and dad before you were born. So there's no awareness in you.
yeah,
The moment you were born and you were taken from your mum for medical reasons, for example, it could
yeah,
be all kinds of things that you actually don't know. So when quite often when I've worked with people with trauma, they just say, I don't know why I've got depression, or I don't know why I'm anxious.
yeah.
I had a really happy childhood.
Mm.
That's
And I
all.
think that's
Yeah.
some of, so with the DSM, it's like an experience of a threat to life.
Yeah.
And I think that in some ways that's a useful definition. And in some ways, a bit like you're saying, like there's more we know about epigenetics and passed down trauma. And I mean, somewhere down there, there's going to be threat to life, right? So, and what does that even mean, threat to life? I mean, how long does a baby have to cry before a baby feels a threat to life? Um, so there's a part of me which is kind of why I have that flowery thing about a definition, which is kind of why I was wondering about what happens for you, that you're feeling discomfort with. So it might be, I feel frozen, I feel stuck, I feel trapped, I feel fizzy in my body, I feel fury, like filled with fury and overwhelmed. And usually a word might be out of control. I feel out of control. Um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So all of those are ways that so one of the things that we talked about, we wanted to kind of talk about today was how the way we've responded to the things that have happened to us are actually survival strategies. And if our autonomic nervous system hadn't responded in those ways, we'd have been overwhelmed. And I was saying my brain would have fried if I hadn't shut down in the way that I did.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'd have definitely been overwhelmed with the number of things that were happening when I was a child. So that's one of the things we wanted to talk about today. So if you want to talk about the responses of the autonomic nervous system and how actually it's here to save us from dying in effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things, a lot of coping strategies get bad press, don't
Yeah.
they? Whereas it's a way for us to try and survive in the best way that we know at the moment that we kind of take those on. Um, but yeah, so the autonomic nervous system, I've got a little diagram. I'll see if I can show it to you because it might be a useful little thing here. Let me see. Sorry, just give me a minute. I'll try my best to be quick. Do you see this?
Yeah.
I'll see if I can make it big. Okay, so part of the reason I'm showing it to you is, so this is from the workbook that I wrote with Babette Rothschild. And there's a little diagram here that was the reason why I wanted to show you. It's because we have sort of two responses really. So we take in sensory information from external environment, and it can go straight to our amygdala, which is the emotional center of our brain, and then we respond. So, for example, it might be that out of the corner of our eye or peripheral vision or straight on, we see a lion. And our emotional center will say, oh my goodness, a lion. We're going to run, we're going to fight it, or we're going to pretend that we're dead. Yeah. Or we're going to stay really, really still and hope that it doesn't notice us and it'll carry on. And there are options. And whatever the amygdala decides will be based on past experience, will be based on what it thinks we can get away with. And there's no, I mean, it's hard to kind of put rhyme or reason to the decisions that the amygdala makes, really. But it happens like that. It happens instantaneously as we need it to. Yeah, there's no like, oh, well, we've done 20 push-ups this week. Maybe we can fight a lion. There's none of that. There's just a response. So the other kind of response is to take in exteroceptive, so external information from our environment. So what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, all of those things. And then it goes instead to the cortex, so the part of our brain that thinks, that makes logical decisions. And then it goes to the amygdala, the emotional center, and then that sends information to the rest of our body and what to do. So that's the more kind of thought out decision making thing. And I've put some examples here. So here it might be, I saw my friend enter the cafe and walk over to me. I thought that they will need space to sit down, and I moved my bag to create space. You know, that's like I've taken in some information, I've thought about what I'm going to do, and then that's what I do. And the example that I give in the fast response is a friend approached me from behind in a busy cafe and tapped me on the shoulder. I jumped out of my chair and screeched. That wasn't like, oh, I know what I'll do now is I'll jump out of my chair and I'll screech. There was no cognitive awareness, which means that the kind of subconscious parts of our brain were making those decisions. And I think part of the reason, especially why Elham, when you were just talking about that, is that sometimes people give themselves a really hard time about the decisions that they made or what they felt like the decisions that they made during a traumatic experience. And the reality is that we don't have control of that. We don't have rational cortical control of that. Yeah, so a subconscious part of our brain has control of that.
Yeah. And we just respond in whatever way we need to in order to stay alive, really, in order to stay safe.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how that decision is made, I mean, it's sometimes really difficult to make sense of.
Yeah.
We might be able to kind of tweak those decisions. So for example, if somebody is a martial artist and they're like a black belt or something, maybe the amygdala would take that information and decide that it's good to fight, but maybe not, you know. So there's something about how do we forgive ourselves for the actions that we unconsciously did during
Yeah.
a traumatic incident, because and accepting the limitation of that. Yeah, it's really important.
Well, I wonder if now would be a good time to just do a quick practice just for a couple of minutes or a few minutes. Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Now that we've talked about that.
Yeah. Okay. So one thing that can be quite useful is to really simple is to have a look around where you are, and the reason for that is to sort of go against the startle reflex. So with the startle reflex, we sort of become quite stiff and we don't dare to look. So have a look around, see if you can notice anything your favorite color, just to allow your neck and your eyes to move. And as you're looking around the room, making sure, taking in the information, am I safe here? Is there anything that I need to take care of to make myself more safe? And then have a wiggle of your toes. Notice what the feel ears, so if your toes rubbing together, if that's possible. If it's not possible, to wiggle your toes. If it's possible, to wiggle your fingers. If it's not possible, to wiggle your fingers. If it's possible, to wiggle your tongue against your teeth. See what's possible for you. And then if it's possible for you to, as you breathe in, lift your shoulders up to your ears and push them back, and then and then we'll have one more. My friend calls this the cosmic shrug, and there's a second bit to the cosmic shrug which goes like this. Open your arms out as wide as you can, and you say the word magnificent. Magnificent.
Magnificent.
Yeah, magnificent.
Magnificent.
And just check in with how you're feeling. So having a look around, disturbing the startle reflex, having a wriggle of your toes or your fingers or whatever's accessible to you, having a shrug, emphasis on the exhale, which can help to bring about the parasympathetic sort of rest and digest part of our nervous system. And having that, as if we lift our body out like that, we kind of elongate the spine and kind of allow our spine to lengthen. And within that, maybe have a little bit of uplift as well, a bit of backbone, feeling of our
Yes,
back.
one of the things to kind of perhaps point out is that this automatic response that you talk about, we're taking the information in all the time, right? So we're not even aware what that thing happened then, but our responses might stay stuck in that original response, and
Yeah.
and one of the ways to sort of break the cycle, because one of the things we want to thread through this conversation is there are things you can do, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was never taught the things that you can do until, I entered this kind of work. But one of the things that you can do is to change the way your posture, and also, power pose. Someone's put it's a power pose. Exactly. Change your posture, because that gives information. When you're scared, you're kind of collapsed, or if if when you're in a fight or flight situation, you might be breathing really fast. You won't be stretching, certainly, because you're trying to get away.
Yeah.
And the blood has gone to your muscles and you're trying to get away, basically, to fight or run. So one of the ways to intercept is to get really slow. If you're in fight or flight situation, to breathe and to actually become conscious of your breathing, not necessarily to take long exhales, because that's long, or very long breaths, because that's not available for everyone. That can actually be more anxiety producing. But there are ways of intercepting this automatic response, and movement and breath are the quickest ways that I've personally found out, as well as tapping. Tapping really helps, but
I say that there's just one step before. I agree.
go ahead.
One step before is the noticing.
Noticing, of course, yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's something about the importance of awareness,
Yeah.
and kind of so before the changing happens, kind of the noticing, and it might be more of a question before the because there's also something, I guess, there's also lots of I guess there's something for me in meeting the body where it is as well,
Yeah.
and meeting
Yeah.
you where it is. So it's something like when we feel really kind of
Jittery.
jittery, if we try and go to that, from that to like complete relaxation, that is just inaccessible.
Yeah.
So there's something about, well, how do I kind of instead become more in control of that? So instead, maybe, okay, well, my body kind of wants to shake, which is a really normal response, like an autonomic response. We see animals do it. You might see animals or dogs doing the shaking. Well, okay, what's it like for me to shake? And then to slow that down and slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's important to, definitely, it's an important thing that I was saying that we quite often get referrals from GPs and other places where somebody will ring and say, I've got really high anxiety, or I've got flashbacks, or I can't sleep. They're in a heightened state of distress, really, and their recommendation has come to them that you should go to the Tara Centre for meditation. And very often I say that's not what you need right now. Maybe come and join us in Qigong, or find, come for walks in the woods, or, I'll suggest some movement generally, or
Yeah.
some other doing thing, like you was talking about bike mechanics,
Yeah.
because it's in fact, I'd say it's dangerous even to go from that heightened state to forcing somebody almost by prescription, which sometimes it feels like. People want to comply with what they've been referred for. It can be counterproductive and dangerous for someone to sit and focus inwards. So one of the things we hear is people blaming themselves, saying, I'm no good at meditating, I can't meditate, but they say it in a self-blame kind of way.
Yeah.
So a lot of my work is to kind of try and explain that actually that's not the appropriate activity for you right now.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you said about the shaking, and maybe we'll talk about other things as well,
I
when we.
think just I guess just one thing on that is that I think just I guess I shared a little practice and often before I kind of share anything, my big disclaimer is, everything is good for somebody.
Yeah,
Nothing is good for everybody.
no,
So what's really, really important with any kind of practice or anything uh, uh, that we're kind of sharing or even that we're talking about today is just having that in mind, noticing what is right for you in those moments, because also that'll change,
yeah,
on a Thursday afternoon something might be just right for you, and on a Friday morning, oh, it might be more activating.
yeah,
So it's something about being Goldilocks, allowing yourself, giving yourself permission to find what is just right, and experimenting with that. And I really like that word experiment, because I think it allows us to be creative. It allows us to test things out. It allows us for things to be wrong, for not to work, and gives us permission to try something different. So there's something about, and I think that was really important for me. So earlier you spoke about your journey a little bit. And I guess one of the things for me was knowing that, that when people say, oh, this is great. And then it's like, oh, actually, I feel awful doing that. I feel awful lying down on the floor in a yoga class when, in my 20s. That was really activating for me. I felt
yeah,
really overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, something wrong with me,
yeah,
because I don't feel relaxed at all. I feel awful.
yeah,
And then kind of learning to accept, really, a bit like you, I didn't have anyone to say it, but learning to accept, well, actually, well, this is just different. What's good for me is different. Actually, riding my bike up a hill makes me connect with the power of my body, with my muscles. And actually, that's more useful for me when I'm feeling overwhelmed, is to feel the tensegrity and strength of my body rather than be in a collapsed state.
yeah,
Might be more triggering for me. And that's actually really common. And it does have a diagnosis. So there's a thing called relaxation induced anxiety that people experience. So if for some people, relaxing muscles can bring on a state of anxiety.
yeah,
And particularly with people who've experienced collapse in a traumatic experience, what can be more relaxing is to have a little bit of muscle tone.
yeah. A container almost to be contained.
Yeah, so we can feel that we're held together,
Yeah,
that we are boundaried, and and to feel that connection with the earth, with
yeah.
our environment. Yeah.
So we were talking about, both of us being passionate about, passing on this awareness, so that nobody ever feels like it's their own shortcoming because of the way they react to things, or that it's, that is an individual response. And one of the things that is important, I think, for us to realize, this kind of, for example, this kind of bracing that you do before a fight, when you go where everything's tight. Actually, yeah, a lot of us are constantly in that state as women, as young people, as disabled people, as Black or minority people, or as transgender people, in all kinds of ways where the society we live in has made it unsafe for us or people in poverty, or people on benefits who are attacked, or single mothers who are attacked. There's so many layers. There's so many of us that feel we need to brace ourselves. This bracing is actually part of our survival mechanism, and it's for good reason.
Yeah.
We're on the lookout for, we are hyper vigilant. We're on the lookout. As a young woman, I remember walking the streets back home, after a night out, and being absolutely terrified most of the time.
Yeah.
So now, because I'm not out in late at night, but many, 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 many situations. For example, I remember walking into a pub in Leicester. My car had broken down, and I asked to use somebody's phone. This is before mobile phone, and the guy behind the thing just didn't acknowledge me. Just wouldn't even talk to me. He didn't even. And then my friend walked in, who was English, white English, and he gave the phone to her. So, that when I've had many, many of those situations. So if you have those situations where you're not even spoken to or seen, next I walk into pubs with quite a lot of tension.
Yeah.
And I'll only go to like one or two places, right? That I know. I won't walk into an unknown pub, for example. Somebody else that I'm with will have to go in first, check it out, and then I follow. Still, after all these years. And that situation is very common from very many people. We've all had all kinds of situations where we don't feel safe. So I think it's important to also to not individualize trauma, to actually understand that, the society we live in has created not only that, but also the things happening across the world and our constant witnessing of it and feeling disempowered that there's nothing we can do about it.
Absolutely.
So I think it's really important to put our individual experience. So yeah, I've been through what I've been through, you've been through, and we've all been through what we've been through as individuals. But
Can I add something as well?
yeah, go ahead, please.
And we're living in an ecological crisis. So the thing that we're living on is also experiencing trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it a deep,
Add
deep?
another layer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of the ways that we're responding are necessary for us to survive. If our first response is to get angry, well, that's probably what we need, the world needs. But it's how much do we get angry that doesn't damage us, or how much do we just say, do you know what, I can't look at this and just go inwards? How good is that for us? This idea of, we talked about it before, about flexibility of our responses, of being able to have choices and sometimes respond like this and sometimes respond like that as needed.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that in context, that it's not all about some of us are in a constant traumatizing state. Many of
Absolutely.
many of us. We live in a
Absolutely.
toxic society.
Yeah. And I think that as well, I guess there's two things a few things on my mind. One thing is, um, there's something about what you were talking about, where there's a subconscious or automatic tension and anger. And I guess there's something about how do we get more control of it so that we can be, anger is such a useful emotion. What brought to mind was there's a Maya Angelou quote, and I really wish that I could remember it. So I was half tempted to start typing, but it's something like bitterness eats us up, whereas anger, gets us what we want. It isn't that. much better. I'll see if I can find it before the end. Um, and there's something about that, and I think one thing that you and I were talking about the other day is how do we can be in. I think one of the things that feels almost unimaginable sometimes, especially when we've experienced lots of trauma, is that we can feel angry and we can feel sad and we can feel afraid even, and at the same time be in control and grounded with those feelings, so that instead of being like overwhelmed and furious, and where we're in that anger where we say things that, oh, and then afterwards we're like, oh, I can't believe I said that, where our hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that deals with memory and stuff, is offline. So of course we can't remember what we said, and the rational part of our brain is offline, so we don't say really what we'd like to say. Whereas if we can find that grounded present sense of our anger, we get to say what we want to say, we get to set the boundary that we want to set, we get to feel in control of ourselves and our advocacy.
Mm.
So there's something about that as well. I think that really links in with the autonomic nervous system and with advocacy and kind of that walking around in that state. And the other thing that I guess came to mind as you were speaking was how important pockets of safety are. Really recognizing and feeling, where is it that I can feel safe and stable in this world? And being in and finding those pockets, and really, again, with the Goldilocks, being really particular about it. So a bit like you said, where you send somebody in the pub ahead of you. Now that is not that's not ideal. And at the same time, it sounds like in this mess, it gives you some reassurance and stability and a little bit of something that sounds helpful in a bad situation. And I think there's something about finding those and allowing yourself to have them, because I think that's also something as well, like, oh, I should just power through, I should just get on with it, what's wrong with me, why do I need to sit at the back of the bus so I can see who's getting on, why do I need to, I should just be all right anywhere. And there's something about the permission giving as well, that in allowing us to have those pockets of safety and recognizing what helps us feel safe in those situations and giving ourselves permission to have it.
Yeah, and for me, the Tara Centre community really is one of my safe places. And people wonder why um, I gave up my career and I've put so much into it. Is I couldn't bear the thought of somebody else being like me on their own, and not having access to a community of support, which I didn't as a young person. So I wanted to create a place where people felt safe and could come together, and um, that's before we started recording. I was saying how lovely it was to see people on screen, and I find it difficult to market things because then I don't know who's going to join us. And will it still be a pocket of safety? So it's an interesting thing. So I wonder if would it be okay to just do a quick other practice? Would you be up for that? Just since
Yeah.
we're talking about uh, you know,
Yeah.
things that could be quite upsetting. So how
Yes.
could we just settle ourselves again before we carry on with the questions, maybe?
There's something that's, I guess, kind of linked in with what I was saying about muscle toning, might be just something to experiment with. And again, experiment. So I think maybe it's useful to just kind of take a moment to check in with noticing how you are. Maybe just notice if body sensations are okay for you to check in with. Maybe notice that. Maybe notice what emotions you're feeling right now, or maybe notice any thoughts in your mind. Maybe just kind of notice an overall sense of how you're doing. And then, so sometimes when we get into that kind of stuck feeling, something that can be useful. Well, okay, I'll say a bit. So if you're in kind of a fight or flight kind of mode with muscle toning, sometimes kind of doing push-ups against the wall can be useful to really kind of feel into the muscles of your upper arms and back. Sometimes it might be doing like squats or and adapting these so that you're not like exhausted, and that it's a pleasant feeling of feeling into your muscles. But if you're in that kind of frozen state, that can feel too much. It can feel a bit overwhelming. So something a bit smaller can be useful. And there's some practices that Moretta, I'll put a link somewhere for her, shares. And we can just have a little practice now and move my thing back. So one of the things is to start with, experiment, and just if you put your hands together in front of your body, and I'm too close to the back of my chair, so I'm going to move a little bit further forward, and then notice what it would be like to, this is very, very, very small. So just very small, almost unnoticeable, a gentle kind of push of the hands together, but very little. Almost so that it's so little that it feels like a bit like there's maybe a part of you saying, that's not enough. So just a little. And notice where in your body you notice that. So notice if there's any kind of muscle activation, tiny, tiny, anywhere. What do you notice, Ellen? What do you notice, Elham?
Main thing I noticed was that I was really pushing hard.
Oh, okay.
And I was thinking, one thing about trauma responses is black and white thinking, it's either got to be really hard or it's not there at all. So as soon as you said that, I thought, oh yeah, I was pressing really hard.
Oh, great noticing. I mean, that's always the first and most important thing, maybe,
Yeah.
is awareness. So for me, I feel something below my shoulder blades, and it's only tiny, but it's in the back of my body that I feel it. I feel it in my back. Do you feel the same, or do you feel different, or do you feel nothing? There's no right answer.
Are you asking me, or were you just, yeah? I could feel some tension around my teeth on the left, actually. Yeah, I just became aware of this.
Okay. So notice whether this is whether you feel better, whether you feel worse, whether you feel the same. Useful information. And then the next thing is to have your hands like this. And again, if possible, so quite relaxed in your elbows. And again, if possible, not this, just little, but maybe enough so that you can feel a little something. So for now, if notice, a little bit. If you don't feel anything at all, you could do a little bit more if it feels okay. But stay small. And notice where you feel any kind of muscle activation there. So for me, I feel something here and something in my core actually, and it doesn't have to be very much all for me to feel that in my body. How about you?
Exactly the same. I felt something there and here. Yeah.
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 So for some people, feeling a little bit more in the front of their body can feel quite good. And for some people, feeling something in the back of their body can feel quite good. And for some people, neither can feel good. So it's all the experiment. So the next thing is if you have your feet on the ground, both feet on the ground, and I'm going to do it with my hands because I can't, it's going to be tricky for me to show you my feet, if I'm honest. So first of all, if you're sitting on a chair, sort of, if it's possible to, and if it's available to you, if you bring your back away from the back of the chair, if not, it's okay. But just see if it's possible to find a neutralish spine, if that's available to you. And first of all, see what it would be like to push the outside edges of your feet into the
Feet.
ground. Yeah, sorry, because you can't see my feet. I thought I'd do it with my hands.
We're not doing anything with the hands. Okay.
It's just me with my hands. So push the outside edges of your feet into the ground. And again, it doesn't have to be loads. Experiment with how much feels what for you. And just notice. So notice what muscles are coming into holding for you. What's happening for you? And you could go in and out of it to check, maybe.
Yeah, I felt less connected to that, I suppose.
Yeah.
So what I'm noticing is that I'm less connected to my feet.
Good notice.
Yeah.
So for me, I noticed the kind of outsides of my thighs. And again, I noticed something in the back of my body. For me, that's everyone's different. So that's what happens for me. Now this time we'll experiment with it. And so just notice what that's like for you, what you notice, and better, worse, the same. Yeah. Today, in this moment. And then experiment with the inside of your feet, kind of pushing against the floor. You might notice that some people say, like, close your eyes or open your eyes as you do this. Whatever helps. I think that's really, give yourself permission to notice what's right for you. Some people find closing their eyes comforting and safe feeling and able to concentrate on their body. And some people find that really activating. I quite like to keep my eyes open. So do whatever's right for you. So just notice what happens when you do this with your feet. What's happening for you?
The only thing I got was that it's quite a pleasant experience.
Okay.
Like, oh, that's nice. That's generally what I got.
That's nice.
Hmm.
What happens for me is this time it's the inside of my thighs, I notice. And for me, there's more activation in this, in probably here again. Yeah, in this part of my body. And actually, I think a bit like you, maybe I feel like I sit up a little bit more. Yeah. And then this time, so notice what happens for you, notice better or worse. And again, like you, notice emotion as well. Yeah, notice what comes up, anything that comes up. And then this time, maybe try both feet and see if it's possible not to give yourself like 100% tension in your thighs as you do this, or just play with like what feels enough.
What are we doing? Sorry, I didn't hear what.
This time we're going to push both of our feet in,
Push both.
which I need a little. I'm going to put a little. You can get a book or something. For me, I need something underneath my feet to do that. So notice what happens for you. And actually, if you go in and out of it, sometimes that helps you kind of notice what happens for you.
That made me feel a bit anxious.
Okay.
I can feel a bit of tension, but not tension in a nice way. Tension in a yeah.
Great noticing. So that one's not for you.
No, didn't like it.
Great. It's all information. I think that's the thing about the experiment. It's like, I didn't need that thing. I have this other thing that made me feel good. So great. For me, my spine felt more expansive when I did that. So I noticed that. Yeah, I felt kind of a bit more uplifted, which felt pleasant for me, actually. Yeah. So just show, that whole thing, like different things for different people is really, really important to notice that.
So when would you use these exercises, Nes?
Well, often they can be useful if you're feeling like in kind of a bit of a dissociated or collapsed state, or a bit of a freeze state. And I guess by that, I might explain that a little bit. So if you're feeling a little bit foggy, if you're a bit disconnected, if you're feeling that kind of like, oh, is the world real kind of feeling, that feeling where maybe you end up kind of scrolling on your phone because maybe there's a part of you that wants to kind of hide away. in those kinds of moments where yeah, that can be useful in bringing a tiny bit of a weight of connection back.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, but keep
So,
it tiny.
sorry, go on. What?
Just a permission to kind of keep them small.
Yeah. So before we move on to the questions, we've got a few minutes for questions. One of the things that we both wanted to stress is that what we call recovery doesn't happen in big leaps and bounds. And sorry, not I didn't mean that. Let me get my words straight. It doesn't happen in a kapow moment necessarily. Lots of people talk about recovery in the sense of they say, "Oh, I'm going on this weekend retreat and I've been promised I'm going to recover," or "I'm going on this," and they're looking. And I was one of those people probably. Not necessarily looking for a kapow moment, but looking for healing, looking for the pain to stop, looking for answers, I guess. And what I've learned over the years, both professionally and personally, is that it's in the small things. It's incremental and it's in practice, practice, practice. And it's in the noticing, it's in the awareness, it's in the giving permission, it's in the relationships, it's in the friendships, it's in the community, it's in the connections. It's in going backwards, falling down, getting up again, having people to catch you when you fall. It's yeah, it's in the small, tiny, tiny things, and that doesn't look like recovery until you've made such, the tiny things have gone so far that you look back and go, oh, I don't feel like this anymore, or I feel like I've got choices now, or actually I'm standing taller, or I don't seem to be reacting in the same way. But it takes time, and anyone who tries to sell you a quick fix, anyone who tries to tell you come and do this thing and this thing will help you recover, only this thing, this is the what you need. We see that a lot on Facebook, on try this thing. There's a 6-week course, it's a 4-week course, and this is the answer to anxiety. Do the 6-week course and you'll recover from anxiety, or all of these are false. And because we live in this society of quick fixes, all of a sudden, everyone's looking for quick fixes. And I think it's important to remember that the way we recover, or the way to healing, which is becoming whole and in effect feeling in control. I think what you said is really important, to feel like you've got control of your life and that you can make choices, is in the practice of the everyday, is in the practice of the small things. So what we've just done might look to somebody who hasn't practiced these things, oh, like, why are we doing that? I was looking for a big answer, but actually it's in the small things that we're giving messages of safety to the nervous system.
Yeah.
That's the important thing, and it doesn't take much so I can tell you this with all the work that we do. We don't offer any of these, EMDR, or we don't offer any of these CBT, any of these big named therapies. What we offer is friendship, support, community, and some kind of, safety mechanism. And people tell us over and over and over again that we've saved their lives. Especially our work with asylum seekers. It doesn't take much. It's not in the big, I just really want to stress, it's not the big kapow moments where healing happens. It's in the small, small, small practice, 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 awareness, awareness, awareness.
And nothing, relational support is there's all this research been done. I mean, I do some of those therapies that you listed, but like and in the research, what we show is that the biggest factor is relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's so important, and everything that's new in brain science and all of that points to the social engagement system, and how we co-regulate, how we need each other, how we are social beings, we're social animals, and there's something that's very individualistic about the way that our society functions, and even in some ways the way that therapy functions, and how we can find learning really from collectivist cultures and from collectivist understanding so that we can find recover. I mean, I'm not even sure about recovery, because there's something about recovery that means returning back. And I actually think that, it's a journey and you end up actually somewhere else, somewhere new. So I'd like to find a different word that wasn't healing or recovery, because I think that we end up in a new place actually. Um, but yeah, so there's something about that. Absolutely about relationships. Yeah.
So if anyone's interested, I'm going to just show you Nessa's book with Babette, which has got extremely helpful exercises in it. Is this back to front for you? I don't know if it's back to front. Is it the right way up? The right way up? What do you, I'm not sure what you're pointing. So keys to 8 keys to say
Safe trauma.
recovery, and it's the workbook. So Babette wrote the original
Rewrote it.
a long time ago. I'll share it with you later, and also Nes. I'll share it with you later. And Nes has these beautiful cards that have just come out. These are resources as well with her own photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right now, back to front. It's the Wild and Wellbeing card deck, and it's basically like lots of different invitations and experiments to connect with our bodies, with other than human nature, with our environments around us, to feel a greater sense of grounding and connectedness and belonging.
yeah, fantastic. So we can share the links for those. So I'm aware that we have just a few minutes left, and I received a question earlier, which it's a very huge topic, but it's one that's very close to my heart. I'll just read it because I think it's important to acknowledge this, and we don't necessarily have the answers. But I was thinking about the topic tonight and wondered what Ness may think about trauma in everyday life in the form of struggles, in the form of lack of help, illnesses, poverty, and how this causes a person to almost live or exist in a state of trauma, in a state of fight or flight, or full of adrenaline. How a person coping with these challenges may help the nervous system or come out of the autopilot state. I find for myself, although I do daily practices, this has become the pattern. I don't know if this would be good or relevant question, but it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And often, if we don't meet our basic needs, it's very hard to thrive up the ladder. We live in a society that, with so much inequality and unfairness, it would be interesting to get new perspectives on how someone may blossom from this place. It's such a poignant question for all of us.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and people are saying that's a great question. Absolutely, 100%. And I know we don't have the answers, but I just wanted to say the question. And if you have anything you want to share about that, Ness.
I think it kind of goes back to well, a few things. I think it's about identifying where you find pleasure and joy. And I mean, there's a really good quote again. I'm really bad at remembering quotes. Angela Davis wrote something beautiful about how important joy and beauty are in our lives, as well as kind of fighting for against injustice.
Mm.
And I think it's kind of having that kind of noticing, what is it that brings me pleasure? What is it that brings me joy? What is it that brings me calm? And finding pockets of those in your life, in your day, are so important. We're flooded with horrors in all different kinds of forms, and there's something about, can I make, not in a, I'm not going to look at it, I'm not in a way that's like I'm turning away from it and not going to help advocate and be part of that movement, but in a way of, I recognize that I've had my fill of that for the moment, and I need to see also something joyous, something beautiful, something peaceful, something relational. I need to spend time with people who um, bring me joy, lift me up, and that relational aspect that we spoke about before. And I think sometimes it can feel, I'll just quickly sort of say this. I think sometimes it can feel like, do those people exist? And I guess my response to that is, yeah, they do. But also that, there's again, the Goldilocks thing comes in about discernment and kind of awareness, where you really notice what happens in your body, happens in your emotions, in your thoughts when you spend time with people or when you spend time doing an activity. It goes back to what I was saying before about me in a yoga class in my 20s. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to be feeling this, but I wasn't. So actually, how can I be discerning to find where I find real joy and where I find real pleasure, real calm, real connection? And there's a really quick story. So there's a story of a Victorian botanist who spent lots of time in the Alps trying to find this fabled flower, and spent months and months and months wandering all over the Alps trying to find this flower. Couldn't find it, gave up. Walked back down the mountain and tripped over. And as he sort of picked himself up, lo and behold, there was a flower, the flower that had been described to him. And he drew it in his book and wrote all about it and all of that. And once he'd really examined this flower and really looked at it from all angles and drawn it and written about it, he started to notice them everywhere. He started to notice that actually the whole mountain was full of these flowers. And there's something about that, like when we kind of notice what it feels like, what good enough feels like, what okay feels like, what connection feels like, it's easier then to find more of it.
Yes.
And the way that we start that process is by noticing our response, noticing what it feels like in us.
And giving ourselves permission. Yeah, definitely. That's beautiful, beautiful way to end our conversation. I'm just going to read you. So the quote I think you were looking for may have been, bitterness is cancer. It eats upon the host, but anger is like fire. It burns it all clean. Is that what you were looking for?
That is it.
That's Maya Angelou's quote.
I do have a poem to finish with, if that's all right.
And then just one other thing. So someone shared, people whose needs are not met seem a long way away from being able to access the state of joy state. Can we do anything to support beauty or connection?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a typical, like one of the typical kind of responses to trauma is that our kind of capacity from feeling kind of joy and pleasure, it feels limited. So there's something about finding the tiny joys. Yeah.
Finding the tiny joys. And also, I have to say, in my work now, if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. After all these years of going through what I've gone through, if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. That's it. Full stop. Doesn't matter what it is. That's the way I make my decisions now.
Yeah.
So before we finish, thank you so much. And we're going to stop. You're going to read us your poem, and then we'll stop the recording. And if anyone wants to stay for a quick chat, you can, or you're welcome to leave straight after. You're welcome. So, Nes, go ahead with your poem. Thank you so much.
It's written by Cleo Wade. It's in this beautiful book called Heart Talk, and it goes, it's called Rooting for Each Other. Do you think Mother Nature cares that any of her beautiful flowers grow in an array of shades and sizes, or that one grows in this direction and one grows in that direction? No. She puts all of them in her magnificent garden so they may be together and root for each other.
Oh, beautiful. We can share that as well. So, okay, I'll stop recording in a second, but before I do, I just want to say thank you so much, Nes. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I hope we can make this a seasonal conversation at least, and maybe we've titivated our community enough to ask some more questions next time we meet. But for now, thank you so much. Lots of love.